On the parched frontier, where survival tested the spirit of every soul, one Alpha Apache returned to a scene that seared itself into memory. His wife staggered beneath heavy water buckets, her shoulders bowed, her breath breaking against the merciless sun. At her side stood her husband, his voice sharp as a whip, driving her forward with commands that stripped her dignity grain by grain. For a moment, silence wrapped the village as neighbors turned their eyes, measuring the worth of both man and woman. Into that silence walked the Alpha Apache, his presence heavy with authority and the old ways of respect. His shadow fell across husband and wife alike, shifting the air with a tension no one could ignore. This was no ordinary quarrel. It was a test of pride, loyalty, and the hidden cost of cruelty. What would unfold when honor confronted shame before the entire village? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert has a way of speaking, though not with words. It whispers in the dry rattle of yucca leaves, sighs through cottonwood branches by the creek, and hums in the stones that bake under an unyielding sun. For the Apache village tucked between red mesas and scrub pine, these sounds were as steady as a heartbeat, anchoring life to a rhythm older than memory. At the center of that rhythm stood the talking drum. Its skin was stretched tight as the very earth itself, and when struck, the sound carried across the valley, rolling into canyons and drifting over sagebrush like a message borne on wind. It was more than a signal for gatherings. It was the village's voice. Through its beats, births were announced, hunters were summoned, and warnings carried across darkened hills. To hear it was to be reminded that no one lived alone, no matter how wide the desert stretched. That morning, as dust hung in the air and smoke curled from cook fires, the drum had sounded a soft, steady call. Not a summons of alarm, nor a call for counsel, but a note that urged attention. People drifted toward the village square, carrying with them baskets, hides, and curious whispers. Word of yesterday's water bucket quarrel had already spread faster than fire in dry grass. The talking drum had not announced that moment. No drum was needed when every eye had seen. But today, its tone seemed to promise that the matter had only begun to take root. The Alpha Apache moved quietly among them, his shoulders square, his gaze steady. He was not the tallest nor the loudest man of the people, but he was one whose presence gathered silence the way clouds gathered rain. Children paused in play as he passed, their eyes wide, sensing in him something solid, like stone that would not bend to storm. Elders nodded to him with a respect reserved for one who carried not just strength, but restraint. He greeted them each with calm words, his voice carrying weight without force. Nearby, women spread woven blankets on the earth, setting down cornmeal and dried beans, their hands moving in practiced rhythm. Among them worked the wife who had been made to carry the heavy buckets. Her back still bore the soreness of the burden, but her face betrayed little. She moved with grace, though her silence was loud enough to echo. Those who watched her saw not just her body, but the quiet resolve inside her, a strength often overlooked in women until tested by hardship. Her husband, meanwhile, lingered at the edges, avoiding the crowd's gaze. Pride stiffened his back, but unease clouded his eyes. Among men of the frontier, authority within the home was seldom questioned. Yet yesterday, before the entire village, the Alpha Apache's shadow had fallen across him, and in that shadow his authority had looked smaller than he had ever imagined. The talking drum struck once more, a low note that rumbled through the square. An elder stepped forward, his hair silvered by age, his hands resting upon a staff worn smooth by decades. He spoke not of judgment nor of punishment, but of memory. He reminded the people that dignity is not only a private matter, but the thread that binds families to the tribe itself. When respect falters within a home, the wound is not confined. It seeps into the community, weakening its very spirit. The Alpha Apache listened, his jaw still, his mind working quietly. He thought of his father, a man long gone, who had once told him that power is never measured in how hard a man commands, but in how deeply his words are remembered when silence falls. Yesterday's silence, when the bucket swung heavy from a woman's shoulders, had been a silence of shame, one that no drumbeat could wash away. He knew then that this was not a quarrel that would vanish. It would return, again and again, until answered not with anger but with clarity, as the gathering dispersed. The talking drum sounded a final time, its rhythm softer now, as if speaking only to those who cared enough to listen. The Alpha Apache lingered in the square, his eyes on the drum. He wondered how many times it had spoken through the years, calling people to joy, to grief, to war. Each beat was a reminder that life moved not in solitude, but together, that no man, no woman, no act was ever hidden in truth. The desert wind lifted then, carrying with it the faint smell of juniper smoke. The Alpha Apache drew a long breath, steadying himself. There would be choices to make soon, and not all of them would leave him unscathed. But one truth was already certain. When dignity was broken, it became everyone's burden to restore. And sometimes, even the strongest drum could not drown out the cry of a woman bent beneath water buckets in the sun. The blanket lay folded at the foot of the couple's bed, its patterns faded with years of use. Once its bright threads of red and gold had spoken of unity, woven on the day of their joining, when laughter had filled the lodge and songs were sung into the night. Now the edges were frayed, and the colors dulled, like a memory left too long in the sun. To those who glanced at it, it was only cloth. But to the wife, it was a reminder of how far her life had strayed from the warmth it once promised. She rose before dawn, as always, to grind corn into meal. The rhythm of stone on stone kept her company, steady, almost soothing, though her hands bore calluses from the years. She rarely spoke of pain, for in their world survival left little room for complaint. Yet silence is its own kind of voice, and hers had become louder with each season. Though her husband never listened, the husband, a man once admired for his skill in hunting and riding, carried himself with a pride that had turned brittle over time. Injuries from old raids left him slower than before, and with each passing year he found fewer ways to prove his worth. His temper grew sharp, not because of strength but because of fear of fading, fear of becoming less in the eyes of others. Where once he had offered tenderness, now he barked commands, as though control could shield him from decline. Neighbors whispered about the change, though quietly. In a village where bonds were as visible as the smoke from cooking fires, one household's shadow soon touched others. Women noticed her bowed shoulders, the way she lingered by the well, as though dreading the walk home. Men noticed his hard voice, the way he spoke too loudly, too often, as though daring anyone to question him. Still, most said nothing. It was easier to avert one's gaze than to challenge what a man claimed as his household right. The Alpha Apache, however, did not avert his eyes. He had watched the couple for years, though always from a respectful distance. He remembered the day the marriage blanket was first carried into their lodge, the way the wife's smile had lit her face. He remembered the husband standing tall, his hand firm at her side. Time had withered that image. Now when he saw her, her smile seemed borrowed, worn only in moments when others might look too closely. That morning, the Alpha Apache found himself drawn to the lodge, though he did not enter. He paused outside, listening to the murmur of voices within. The husband's tone was sharp, filled with dissatisfaction over something small, the grinding of the meal, the placement of tools, some slight that carried no true weight. Yet the force of his voice pressed heavy, as though the walls themselves might bend. The wife's reply was quiet, so quiet that only silence answered. The Alpha Apache turned away, carrying the sound with him. He thought of his father again, who had warned him. When a man must shout to prove himself, he has already lost the proof. By midday, the couple appeared together in the square, the wife carrying baskets, the husband walking with deliberate steps, chin lifted. The marriage blanket was draped loosely over her shoulders, not for warmth, but as a sign of union. Yet to those who knew, its fraying edges spoke louder than its patterns. Women glanced at it, exchanging looks. Men shifted uneasily, remembering their own vows, wondering what was owed between husband and wife. In the corner of the square, the talking drum rested silent now, its earlier beats still lingering in memory. One elder leaned close to another and whispered, "The blanket does not lie. It tells us what the tongue will not." As the day stretched long, the Alpha Apache sat by the fire with two trusted friends. They spoke little at first, the crackle of flame carrying their thoughts. Finally one asked, "Will you speak to him?" The Alpha Apache shook his head slowly. "Not yet. A man must face the shadow he casts before another steps into it." The firelight flickered across his face, deepening the lines carved by years of watchfulness. He knew the time for silence was nearing its end. A shadow left unchallenged grows darker, and soon it can swallow more than the one who casts it. That night, the wife folded the blanket carefully, her hands lingering over its worn threads. For her, it was both comfort and sorrow, a reminder of vows once bright, now dimmed by harsh words and heavy burdens. She traced the patterns, as if searching for the joy once woven there, before blowing out the small flame that lit her lodge. Outside, the desert wind rose, rattling the dry grasses. It carried the scent of rain, though no storm yet showed. Shadows stretched across the village, long and heavy, and in their depths the Alpha Apache lay awake. Knowing the storm was not far off, the morning sun had climbed high, hard and relentless, when the wife made her way to the well. The wooden yoke pressed across her shoulders, its weight familiar but no less punishing. At either end hung clay pots, balanced carefully, each filled with water drawn from deep within the earth. The path home was not far, but under the eyes of neighbors, each step felt like a judgment passed upon her back. Her husband trailed a few paces behind, his arms folded, his face taut with displeasure. He barked instructions as though she were a child. "Lift higher, walk straighter, do not spill." His voice carried through the stillness of the square, cutting into the air where children played and women worked. People paused in their tasks, their eyes sliding toward the couple, though their hands pretended to stay busy. The silence of the onlookers was heavier than the water itself. Then came the sound that would be remembered for years, the sharp crack of pottery against stone. One of the pots struck the edge of a rock and split wide open. Water poured onto the earth in a sudden stream, soaking the dust until it turned to dark mud. The wife gasped softly, steadying the other pot before it could fall, her arms trembling with the strain. Her husband's voice rose, furious, loud enough to shake the quiet morning. He called her clumsy, wasteful, careless. His words spilled like poison, not only onto her, but onto the crowd that now gathered around them. No longer whispers. Their presence became undeniable, faces watching, breaths held. The broken clay pot lay at her feet, its fragments sharp as truth itself. From the far side of the square, the Alpha Apache stepped forward. He had been speaking with an elder when the pot broke, and the sound had struck his heart as sharply as any weapon. He moved without haste, but with certainty, his shadow lengthening in the sun. The murmurs of the crowd fell quiet, for when he walked, people sensed a moment was upon them. The husband saw him coming and straightened, defiance flashing in his eyes. "This is my wife," he declared loudly, voice pitched for all to hear. "My household. My word is law within it. None may interfere." The Alpha Apache paused before him, his gaze steady, unflinching. His voice, when it came, was calm, yet it carried further than the husband's shout. "No man has the right to turn strength into cruelty. A household is not a prison. A wife is not a beast of burden." The wife stood between them, silent still, her shoulders trembling though her chin lifted slightly, as if those words had given her breath she had forgotten. The broken clay pot glistened in the sun, the water seeping into the dust, as though the earth itself absorbed the insult. The crowd pressed closer now. Men frowning, women nodding subtly, children clinging to their mothers' skirts. The talking drum remained still, yet hearts beat as though it were sounding. Everyone knew this was more than a domestic quarrel. This was a test of what the village would accept and what it would refuse. The husband's voice broke with anger. "You shame me before them all." "Who are you to stand in judgment?" The Alpha Apache answered simply, "I am a man who carries the burden of our people's honor. And honor does not permit silence when cruelty is seen." The air hung thick. The wife's eyes flicked between them, her lips parting as if she might finally speak, though no words came. The Alpha Apache's stance did not shift. He did not reach for weapon or raise his voice. His strength was not in force, but in the steadiness of his presence. The husband, chest heaving, looked around and saw the faces watching him. Some turned away, but enough remained unflinching, their judgment in their eyes. For the first time, he seemed smaller than the shadow cast across him. At last, he spat onto the ground, muttering words too low for most to hear. He turned sharply, striding away, leaving his wife standing alone by the broken pot. The Alpha Apache stepped forward, not to confront, but to kneel. He picked up one shard of clay and held it in his hand, turning it gently. "When a pot breaks," he said softly enough for those nearby, "the water is lost, but the lesson remains." He placed the shard carefully in the wife's basket, as though it carried weight beyond its form. Then he turned and walked away, the crowd parting for him in silence. The wife stood still, her shoulders straightening slowly. The frayed marriage blanket weighed heavy at home, but here, before the people, something had shifted. The broken clay pot would not be forgotten, nor the words spoken beside it, and in that moment, the first true crack opened, not in pottery, but in the fragile silence that had allowed cruelty to stand unchallenged. In the days that followed the quarrel at the well, silence stretched across the village like a taut rope. No one spoke of it openly, yet everyone carried the weight of what they had seen. The sight of the broken clay pot and the Alpha Apache, standing firm against cruelty, clung to their thoughts like the smell of rain after a storm. Even those who wished to forget could not wash the image away. Children, however, remembered differently. By the fire one evening, a boy with dark eyes and quick fingers took a piece of charcoal from the hearth and scratched on a scrap of bark. His strokes were rough, but soon the shape of the well appeared, the jagged outline of a pot split in two, and a figure drawn tall beside it. The boy's sister laughed and pointed. "That is him!" "That is the Alpha Apache." The sketch passed from hand to hand, carried like a secret. At first it was only a child's amusement, but when the wife herself saw it, its black lines etched firm and true, she held it for a long while before tucking it silently into her basket. She did not smile, but her fingers traced the broken pot as if it were a memory she no longer bore alone. Meanwhile, whispers began to stir among the women at the riverbank, where the water was drawn each morning. Some spoke of how the Alpha Apache had faced the husband without lifting a hand, without drawing blood, and yet had left him smaller in the eyes of all. Others wondered aloud whether such strength might inspire change, or bring ruin upon those who dared to resist. The younger women listened with wide eyes, their voices hushed but filled with possibility. The husband, for his part, walked with his chin higher than ever, though his shadow seemed shorter. He barked orders more loudly, struck the ground with his heel, and laughed too harshly when men gathered to drink. Yet no matter how he puffed his chest, the memory of that day clung to him like a stain. He could not silence the echo of words spoken in public. Honor does not permit silence when cruelty is seen. The wife carried herself differently too. She still hauled water, still ground maize, still tended the fire. But there was a quiet change in the way she stood, as though her spine had found a hidden strength. When the husband raised his voice, her silence no longer bent beneath it. It held. That silence was sharper than any retort, and it unsettled him more than tears ever had. The Alpha Apache did not seek her out, nor did he boast of what had passed. Instead, he moved among the people as before, but the weight of his presence felt heavier now, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Wherever he walked, conversation faltered briefly before flowing again, altered in tone. The elders spoke of balance, of harmony, of the dangers of discord, yet beneath their measured words lay an unspoken truth. The fracture at the well had marked a turning point. One evening, As the sun bled into the horizon, the wife sat outside her home with the basket at her side. The fragment of the broken clay pot still rested within it, alongside the child's charcoal sketch. She looked at them both, one born of accident, the other of innocent eyes, and saw in their pairing something she could not yet name. They were not weapons, not shields, but reminders, proof that even silence had witnesses. That night, she dreamed of water pouring endlessly from broken pots, soaking the earth until flowers rose from the mud. She awoke with tears on her face, though she did not understand whether they were born of grief or of hope. The next day, a small shift occurred. At the well, when the husband barked at her again, another woman, an elder with silver hair, placed her hand gently on the wife's shoulder and said, "Let her be. She carries enough." The words were simple, almost casual, but they carried the weight of courage. For the first time, another voice joined hers in quiet defiance. The husband froze, startled. His eyes flicked from the elder to the wife to the crowd around them. And though he grumbled and walked away, something had cracked again. Not pottery this time, but the wall of silence that had long held firm. By evening the story spread, woven into murmurs at the firesides. People spoke of courage, of shame, of the Alpha Apache's shadow that seemed to linger long after he was gone. The sketch of the broken pot appeared again, passed among children who laughed but also listened. What had begun as a drawing had become a symbol, etched not only on bark but in memory. At the riverbank, the women spoke in lowered voices. "He breaks her spirit as one breaks dry wood." Another added, "And yet she endures." The younger ones listened, their eyes sharp, learning not only the weight of labor, but the burden of silence. When the Alpha Apache passed nearby, their chatter would pause, but their thoughts did not still. The husband, sensing the shift, grew louder. His laughter at the fires was too sharp, his boasts too frequent. He swung his arms wide when he spoke, as if filling the air with bravado could blot out the shadow of doubt. Yet every gesture betrayed what he feared most, that respect, once lost, is harder to reclaim than spilled water. One evening, the council gathered. The talking stick, carved smooth by generations of hands, lay at the center of the circle. It had always symbolized order. Whoever held it had the right to speak, and all others listened. But now, as it passed from hand to hand, its weight felt heavier than ever. An elder cleared his throat. "There is discord among us, not of war, not of hunger, but of conduct. The well is no longer only a place of water. It has become a mirror." His voice wavered with age, but carried a gravity no one dismissed. Another took the stick. "We saw her laboring as a beast, and we said nothing until one among us spoke. Was it right? Was it folly? If a man governs his household with cruelty, do we intervene, or is it his alone to bear?" The stick traveled on, and silence thickened between words. None wished to cast judgment too sharply, for judgment once spoken cannot be withdrawn. And yet the unspoken truth was clear. The Alpha Apache had drawn a line in the dust, and now all were forced to see where they stood. The Alpha himself sat quietly, hands folded, his gaze steady but unreadable. He had not asked for this counsel, had not pressed his will upon the people. Yet his presence was enough. When the talking stick reached him, all eyes turned. He did not seize it quickly, but waited, letting the moment stretch. When at last he took it, his words were simple. "Strength is not measured in how much a man can force another to carry. It is measured in how much he carries for them." No outburst followed. No shouts of approval or denial. Instead, a heavy silence settled, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The stick passed on, but no words afterward carried the same weight. That night, as the fire dwindled and the council ended, the husband walked home stiff with fury. His wife trailed behind, the distance between them as wide as the prairie itself. He muttered curses under his breath, but when he glanced at the others, he saw not admiration, but avoidance. Respect, once his, now bled from him drop by drop. The talking stick had done its work, not by decision, but by making plain what could no longer be ignored. The wife, meanwhile, slept with uneasy dreams. She dreamed of the staff itself, heavy in her hands, her voice rising in a place where women did not speak. She awoke trembling, unsure whether it was fear or longing that shook her. By morning, the village buzzed with quiet debate. Some said the Alpha Apache had spoken truth that cut deeper than a blade. Others whispered that he had overstepped, risking disharmony for the sake of one household strife. Yet all agreed on one thing: the council had not settled the matter. The fracture remained, widening slowly like ice in stone. At the river, the women repeated his words, rolling them on their tongues as if testing their strength. Strength is not measured in how much a man can force another to carry. It's measured in how much he carries for them. The phrase spread, soft but steady, until even children began to echo it in play. The husband heard it too. Each repetition felt like a stone thrown at his pride. He clenched his fists tighter with every passing day, but deep inside, he knew what he could not admit. The village's respect was shifting, grain by grain, away from him and toward the Alpha Apache. And once respect begins to shift, it rarely shifts back. The sun rose harsh and unyielding, pouring light over the village until every shadow shrank to nothing. It was on such a morning that the wife took up the water jug again, her hands steady, her body aching but unbroken. The clay vessel bore a long scar of repair down one side, stitched with resin and care. It had endured shattering and been remade. In its way, it mirrored her. At the well, she lowered the jug into the darkness, listening to the hollow gurgle as it filled. Children laughed nearby, their voices skipping like stones across the still air. But when she lifted the jug to her shoulder, silence rippled outward. Eyes followed. Not for the act itself. Women carried water every day, but because the weight seemed heavier now, freighted with meaning. The husband arrived before she had taken 10 steps. His face was a storm, barely contained. His jaw tight with rage he had failed to smother since the council. He strode forward, voice rising so all might hear. "Will you shame me again? Do you need another man to tell you how to live?" The words struck her like blows, but she did not falter. She shifted the jug, steadied her balance, and kept walking. Her silence, more than defiance, kindled whispers in the crowd gathering at the edges. It was then that the Alpha Apache appeared. He had not sought this moment, yet moments such as these seem to find men who carry a certain weight. He stood at the edge of the path, arms folded, eyes fixed not on the husband but on the jug, as if measuring not clay but what it symbolized. The husband's fury broke. He seized the jug from his wife's shoulder and hurled it to the ground. It shattered, shards scattering like dry leaves in the wind. The water rushed into the dust, vanishing almost before it touched the earth. The gasp of the villagers echoed louder than his shout. For water was no ordinary possession, it was life. To spill it so wantonly, to break a vessel so carefully mended, was more than anger. It was desecration. The wife stood frozen, staring at the fragments. Her hands trembled, yet her eyes rose, not to her husband, but to the Alpha Apache. And in that silent exchange, something passed between them. Not desire, not even alliance, something quieter, heavier, recognition. The Alpha stepped forward at last. His voice was calm, but every word fell like stone. A man who breaks what others need to live breaks more than clay. He breaks himself, the crowd murmured. Some turned away, unwilling to be caught in the rising storm. Others leaned closer, unwilling to miss the reckoning. The husband, red with fury and shame, spat into the dust. "You think yourself my judge? You think you know what it means to command a home? Stay out, Alpha, or I will remind you that not all authority belongs to you." But his words rang hollow. Authority was not claimed by shouting, it was granted by respect. And respect, like water spilled, is hard to gather again. The wife knelt, gathering the shards with careful fingers, as though each piece mattered, as though something broken might still be worth saving. The Alpha bent down and lifted one fragment, a handle smoothed by years of touch. He held it up to the light. "This jug carried water for your children," he said softly. "It carried hope. You have destroyed it. What will you carry now?" No answer came. The husband's hands curled into fists, but his eyes darted, seeking support, finding little. The villagers shifted, some looking at their feet, others holding his gaze but without warmth. That night, fires burned low and the village hummed with restless talk. Some said the Alpha had gone too far, shaming a man before all. Others said the husband had undone himself by spilling water as though it were dirt. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between, but no one could deny the shift. The balance of respect had tilted again, and once more it was the Alpha who stood taller. The wife, in her small hut, placed the fragments of the jug in a basket. She could not explain why she kept them. Perhaps to remember, perhaps to rebuild. Perhaps to remind herself that even in breaking there is testimony. By morning she rose again, a smaller jug at her side. Her steps were weary but unyielding. The village watched her walk to the well, and though no one spoke, a single truth pressed into every heart: strength may bow, but it does not break. The shards, lying in their basket, caught the first rays of dawn. They gleamed faintly, like fragments of something sacred waiting to be restored. The nights grew heavier. In the hush of the village, whispers carried farther than firelight. Respect for the Alpha Apache spread like smoke, curling into corners where once only fear of the husband held sway. Yet with every murmur the husband's pride bled thinner, and his temper grew more dangerous. He kept to his hut by day, muttering into the dimness, striking the walls when no one answered his rage. By evening, he would appear at the fires with forced laughter, boasting louder than the drums. But behind his smile lurked a storm no one dared provoke. His wife endured it silently, her body moving through daily labors, her eyes distant. The fragments of the broken jug still lay in their basket, and sometimes she ran her hand over them, as though smoothing wounds that would not close. The Alpha Apache, for his part, went about his duties with quiet steadiness. He did not speak often of what had passed, but neither did he shrink from it. When he crossed paths with the husband, his eyes did not waver. In that stillness lay a power more cutting than any shouted insult. It was on the third night after the jug shattered that the husband appeared at the fire circle with something in his hands. The war club. Its surface gleamed with oil, rawhide bindings cracked with age, wood polished by years of gripping hands. It had not been seen in many seasons, resting among the heirlooms of his family. To bring it out was not gesture but declaration. The crowd fell silent as he sat heavily, club across his knees. His voice, low and trembling with suppressed fury, carried easily in the still night. "You all think me broken. You think one man's words can steal the respect I've earned with sweat and scars. But let me remind you, strength is not a tale told at council fires. It is proven in blood, in burden, in command. I'm no child to be corrected." He lifted the club, letting the firelight dance across its carved surface. "This has defended us before. It will defend me now. And if any man dares take from me what is mine, be it wife, home, or honor, he will meet it." The circle of villagers shifted uneasily. No one challenged him, but no one spoke in support either. The Alpha Apache sat opposite, quiet as stone, his gaze steady. He did not reach for a weapon, nor did he flinch. His silence was its own reply. The wife stood at the edge of the firelight, her eyes darting between them. She knew well enough what the club meant. A man who carried such a relic into the open was not simply venting his pride. He was warning of violence. When the fire dimmed and people drifted away, whispers followed in their wake. "He will strike. It is only a matter of when." Some counseled the Alpha to leave the husband be, to let the man burn out his anger alone. Others said silence was too dangerous. A fire untended can consume the hut. The Alpha Apache walked home beneath a sky heavy with stars. His thoughts were not of glory or conquest, but of consequence. He knew the husband's pride was a brittle thing, easily shattered, yet sharp enough to cut anyone who touched it. To challenge him openly risked splitting the village. To ignore him risked allowing cruelty to deepen. At his doorway he paused. There, hanging from the wall, was his own staff, plain wood, unadorned yet worn smooth by years of use. He traced its length with his fingers, feeling the grain beneath his touch. He had carried it on hunts, in councils, even in silence at gravesides. It was no weapon of war, but it had borne witness to the seasons of his life. In that moment, he understood. The true battle was not for dominance, but for the meaning of strength itself. One man saw strength in control, in command, in fear. Another saw it in service, in carrying burdens, in respect. These two truths could not coexist forever. The wife, in her own quiet hut, lay awake long into the night. She listened to the wind against the walls, the distant bark of dogs, and the faint creak of leather as her husband turned restlessly beside her. She thought of the shards of the jug, of the Alpha's words, of the war club gleaming in firelight. And she wondered, not with fear alone, but with a strange, growing clarity, whether a day was coming when silence itself would become impossible. By dawn, the village carried on as always. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children raced along the paths, elders sat in the sun with their stories. Yet beneath the surface, all felt the weight of what was gathering. The war club had left its corner of the hut, and once an old weapon has been lifted into the light, it is rarely put away again without being used. The village was not the same after the war club appeared at the fire circle. Though no blow had yet been struck, the mere sight of it left an echo in every household. People carried on with their days, grinding corn, tending fires, hunting, weaving, but in each hut the hearthstone seemed to carry a heavier weight. It was not just the anchor of fire anymore. It was a reminder of what could burn if anger was not contained. At one hearth, two brothers spoke in hushed tones. "If he swings that club, will the Alpha meet him?" the younger asked. The elder shook his head. "If the Alpha fights, he becomes no different. If he refuses, he risks seeming weak. Either way, the village suffers." The fire popped, sparks scattering like restless thoughts. The husband's presence was more volatile than ever. He would walk the paths with the war club resting across his shoulder, his eyes scanning for challengers. Children fled at the sight, their laughter swallowed by silence. Women tightened their circles at the river, their work quickened by unease. Men exchanged looks but offered no words. Pride and fear kept tongues still. His wife moved through these days with a kind of resigned clarity. Her face bore no outward rebellion, but in her hands lingered a quiet strength. She tended her fire carefully, laying each stick upon the hearthstone with deliberate care, as if reminding herself that order still belonged to her in this small way. She whispered to her children as they ate, not of fear but of endurance. Even when flames leap, the stone holds steady. Remember that. The Alpha Apache watched from a measured distance. He did not provoke, but neither did he withdraw. When he crossed paths with the husband, he met his eyes steadily, his hands never near his staff. Some saw this as bravery, others as stubbornness, but all knew it was more than chance. It was principle. Whispers of division began to spread. At one fire, voices argued, "We must stop the husband before he brings ruin." Another retorted, "He is within his rights. A man rules his home as he sees fit." And so the village began to lean in two directions, pulled between silence and intervention. Pride and protection. The council was not called again, for the elders feared what open debate might unleash. Instead, decisions were made in smaller circles, around quiet hearths, where families debated what loyalty meant. Some clung to the belief that peace was preserved by leaving a man to his household. Others, recalling the Alpha's words, began to ask a dangerous question. What if cruelty within a home poisoned the village itself? One evening, as twilight wrapped the land in deep blue, the husband struck a new chord of menace. He returned from hunting, club in hand, and sat at his fire where his children huddled near. His wife placed food before him in silence. He looked at her, then at the stone beneath the fire glowing with heat. "You see this hearth?" he said, his voice carrying. "It is mine. Everything in it is mine. No man, no council, no Alpha will take it from me. And if they try, I will smash more than clay. I will smash bone." The words, though spoken in his hut, carried outward through thin walls and listening ears. By the next morning, the village repeated them in fragments, each telling sharpening their edge. The wife, awake long after the embers dimmed, touched the hearthstone as though it could absorb her fears. She felt its heat steady and grounding, and wondered how long it could outlast the fire above it. A stone endures, but what of flesh and spirit? Meanwhile, the Alpha Apache sat outside his dwelling, gazing into the distance where stars freckled the sky. He thought of his ancestors, of wars fought with bows and rifles, of wounds carried silently. He wondered if the battle before him was greater than any fought with weapons. A man's pride, once sharpened into threat, could tear apart more than homes. It could divide a people. The next day he passed the husband at the river. The war club rested across the man's shoulder, but the Alpha carried nothing. Their eyes locked. Neither spoke. Yet the villagers nearby felt the air tighten, as though the two men carried entire histories in their silence. When the Alpha walked on, shoulders steady, some nodded quietly, emboldened by his calm. Others shook their heads, whispering that he underestimated a storm already breaking. The village fires burned late into that night. At each hearthstone, families spoke in whispers, questions pressing hard against the silence. When pride becomes threat, who bears the duty to act? And if the Alpha does not, who will? The war club gleamed in the husband's hut, leaning against the wall, waiting. The hearthstone beneath the fire crackled, silent witness to the slow fracture spreading wider with each day. The morning began like any other, the sun low on the ridge, the dew damp on the grass, the river's current whispering its endless hymn. Women carried baskets to the water, children darted along the paths, and men walked toward the hunt. But beneath this ordinary rhythm, the tension of weeks pressed like thunder before a storm. The husband was already awake, his war club leaning against the wall, his face drawn and stern. His wife prepared food in silence, her movements careful, measured. The children kept close, knowing better than to draw attention. The hearth's fire burned low, its smoke trailing weakly toward the roof. It was at the river that the day bent into something different. The wife had gone to fill her pot, a vessel she had carried for years. Its surface was smooth from use, its rim chipped in places but still serviceable. She dipped it into the current, steadying it against the pull when the husband appeared. His shadow stretched across her as she lifted it, water glistening on its sides. "You carry too slowly," he barked, loud enough for others to hear. She kept her gaze low, saying nothing. Something in his tone, or perhaps in the silence of those nearby, ignited his pride into fury. He strode forward, and before she could take a step, his hand lashed out. The pot slipped from her grasp, striking a rock at the river's edge. It broke in 3 sharp pieces, the water spilling uselessly into the earth. The sound was small, just clay breaking, but it carried like a drumbeat. Conversations halted. Heads turned. The wife crouched, gathering the fragments, her fingers trembling as she touched the shards. For a long moment, no one moved. Then an elder woman, stooped but unafraid, stepped forward. "A pot is for water, for life," she said softly, her eyes not on the wife but on the husband. "To shatter it in anger is to waste what feeds us all." The husband's face darkened. He lifted the war club from his shoulder as if to silence the old woman, but the eyes upon him multiplied. Men, women, even children, their gazes steady. The wife, still kneeling, pressed the shards to her chest as though they were more than clay, as though they were herself. The Alpha Apache arrived only moments later, drawn by the commotion. He did not speak at once, but stood at the river's edge, his staff planted firmly in the soil. His presence was quiet, but it shifted the air. "The pot is broken," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying. "It cannot be mended, but its pieces tell us what anger can destroy. We have seen it now with our own eyes." Some nodded, relief washing over them that the moment had been named aloud. Others remained stiff, fearing what such words meant for the husband's pride. The husband spat at the ground. "This is my house, my wife, my business. You would make a pot more sacred than a man's word." The Alpha met his gaze. "The pot carried water for more than you. Its breaking was not only hers to bear. We all drank from what it held." A murmur rippled through the crowd. For the first time, the conflict had shifted from private whispers to public fracture. The villagers were no longer merely witnesses. They were participants, forced to reckon with what they had seen. The wife rose slowly, the shards still in her hands. Her eyes did not meet her husband's, but drifted toward the Alpha, then toward the faces around her. In that silence, her posture spoke. She could not speak against her husband, but she could no longer shield him either. The river's current carried on, steady and unbroken, as though mocking the fragility of human pride. That night, fires burned late in the village. Around one hearth, the elder woman repeated her words. "A pot is for water for life. To break it is to waste us all." Around another, a young man whispered, "The Alpha was right. We all drank from it. His cruelty reaches us too." Still others whispered the opposite. "The Alpha shamed him before all. A man will not forget such insult." The husband sat at his own hearth, silent, the war club across his lap. The fire cracked, sparks flying upward, but he did not look at his wife or his children. His mind replayed the moment at the river, each gaze that had dared to hold him accountable. His pride twisted, hardening into something darker. The wife placed the shards of the broken pot at the edge of the fire, where they glowed faintly in the embers. They would never carry water again, but she could not discard them. In their jagged edges, she saw truth that could no longer be hidden. Once broken, some things cut deeper the longer they are held. The Alpha Apache, seated at his fire, knew the fracture was complete. There would be no turning back. A line had been crossed, and the village itself now bore the weight of decision. The broken pot remained in every mind, a vessel lost, but a symbol found. The day after the river incident, the village air was thick with unease. Small groups gathered in hushed tones, their voices carrying fragments of the same subject: the pot, the wife, the husband's rage, and the Alpha's words. It was no longer rumor. It was memory, shared and unshakable. Tradition demanded that disputes of this kind, once witnessed by many, could not be ignored. The Council of Elders summoned the husband and the Alpha to the village circle, where the council stone waited. No man or woman stepped upon it lightly. To sit there was to bare one's soul before the people, to accept judgment not from one, but from all. The husband entered the circle with slow, heavy steps, his war club slung across his shoulder. His jaw was set, his eyes narrow. He was not cowed. If anything, he seemed larger, swelling with the dark pride that humiliation breeds. His wife followed behind, her head low, her hands clasped. The Alpha Apache was already waiting, standing near the council stone with his staff planted in the earth. The elders, 3 men and 2 women, each with hair silvered by time, sat in a half-circle, their gazes steady. Around them, the villagers pressed close, silent, waiting. The eldest of the council, a man called Grey Antler, spoke first. His voice was soft but carried. "We call you here because the river carried not only water but truth. A pot was broken, and with it our peace. We would hear both sides before the stone." The husband spat to the ground, his voice harsh. "You speak of a pot as if it was sacred. Clay breaks, water spills, and the earth drinks. It is nothing. This is a matter of a man's household, not the council's tongue." Grey Antler's eyes narrowed, but it was the Alpha who stepped forward. "No, it is not nothing. That pot carried life for many. The hand that broke it struck more than clay. It struck the dignity of a woman, and it echoed through us all. What a man does to his wife is not unseen by the Creator or by his people." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some nodded, others shifted uneasily. The wife raised her eyes for the first time, glancing briefly at the Alpha, then back to the ground. The husband sneered. "You think yourself judge of men? You shame me before my people. You plant yourself in my house, in my affairs, as though you are chief of all." The Alpha's voice was steady. "I am not chief, but I am witness. And when witness is borne by many, it becomes truth. You may try to silence one voice, but not the river of voices that soar." The council stone loomed between them, cold and immovable. Grey Antler gestured. "If you will sit upon the stone, speak your truth, and let it be weighed." The husband glared at the stone, then at the crowd. His pride balked. To sit would mean binding himself to the council's measure. To refuse would mean admitting his fear. For a moment it seemed he would walk away. Then with a grunt, he dropped onto the stone, the war club across his knees. The Alpha did the same, lowering himself with dignity, staff still upright. The two men faced one another in silence, the stone between them like a third presence. The wife was called next. She stepped forward, her voice small but steady. The pot broke. I did not wish it. My arms were tired, but I carried as I could. When it shattered, I felt the earth open under me. Not because of clay. Because all eyes saw, her words hung in the air, simple yet cutting. The eldest woman of the council, known as Singing Dove, leaned forward. What do you wish, child? The wife's lips trembled. I wish only for peace, to carry water without fear, to walk without trembling. The husband snorted, but the sound carried no strength. His words had weight before, but against hers they fell hollow. The Alpha placed his hand upon the stone. Then let this be known. Respect is not a gift one demands, but a fire one tends. A man who breaks the vessel of his wife's dignity breaks his own strength. We saw it with the pot, and we see it now with our own eyes. The council did not deliver a final judgment that day. They rarely rushed, but something irreversible had shifted. The husband left the circle stiff and fuming, his face a mask of rage. The Alpha rose with calm, though he knew what seeds had been sown. That night the council stone still glimmered in the villagers' minds. It had not ended the matter, but it had named it. And once named, a truth cannot be buried. The circle of judgment dispersed, but the echoes of it followed the husband like a swarm of hornets. Every step he took across the village paths seemed met with lowered eyes, with whispers that dissolved into silence. When he turned his head, he felt the weight of unseen gazes more than the blazing sun above him. Pride, once his armor, now burned like chains upon his chest. That night in the narrow shelter he called home, the husband sat cross-legged by the fire, staring at the flickering coals. His wife moved about quietly, tending the pot that held their meager meal, her body hunched as if bracing for another storm. He did not strike her, not this time. His fury was aimed elsewhere now, fixed on the Alpha, whose voice had cut through his authority like a blade. From a leather pouch hidden in the corner, he drew forth a knife, not his war club, which was meant for battles fought in the open. This was different, a shadow knife, the kind a man carried pressed against his thigh or in the folds of his belt. It was not meant for war cries or drums. It was meant for silence, for endings delivered when no one watched. He traced its edge with his thumb, and in the fire's glow his eyes hardened. The wife saw the glint of the blade and froze. She dared not ask its purpose. Instead, she whispered softly, "The elders listen to you less when you carry silence in your hands." The Creator does not bless knives hidden in the dark. He snapped his gaze to her, fury rising, but she did not flinch. For the first time in many moons, she met his stare without trembling. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring before he growled, and she looked away. Yet the words had struck deeper than she knew, lodging like stones in his restless thoughts. In the days that followed, the husband began to move differently. He walked not as one among his people, but as one apart, lingering at the edges of gatherings, listening, watching. When others laughed, he stood still. When others worked, he feigned labor, but his mind wandered. His war club stayed slung across his back, but the shadow knife never left his hand's reach. The Alpha, meanwhile, felt the shift. He noticed the way the villagers' voices softened when the husband approached, how children slipped away, sensing storms without needing words. He saw the wife in the mornings, shoulders bent, carrying smaller buckets now, lighter loads, granted by the council's quiet influence. Yet her eyes remained wary, for she knew the war club was not the only danger a man might wield. One evening, as dusk spread its long shadows, the Alpha found himself speaking with Grey Antler. They sat upon a ridge overlooking the village, smoke rising in thin columns below. "He festers," Grey Antler said, not naming the man, because both knew who. When pride is pierced, it seeks either healing or revenge. "I do not yet see which path his feet will walk." The Alpha's gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the last light painted the hills in fire. I fear his feet are already chosen. His hand clings not to peace, but to shadow. Grey Antler nodded slowly. Then watch the night, for that is where shadows sharpen their teeth. The husband's plotting deepened. He lingered at the river's edge after others departed, practicing quiet steps, testing the balance of the shadow knife in his palm. He spoke less, but when he did, bitterness curled around his words like smoke. He dreamed of the moment the Alpha would not see him coming, when silence would cover his tracks and the stone of judgment would never hear the truth of his hand. Yet inside him, another war raged. The wife's words about silence, about the Creator's disfavor, gnawed at him. For every moment he gripped the shadow knife, a flicker of doubt pricked him. Not mercy, not repentance, but fear that unseen forces might mark his soul for what he intended. That fear only deepened his anger. "Better to be feared than mocked," he muttered one night, staring at the knife's reflection in the firelight. The steel showed his face warped, twisted, as though the blade itself reminded him of what he was becoming. The Alpha, sensing danger, but not yet knowing its form, began to walk with greater care. He carried his staff not only as a guide, but as a ward. He spoke more often with the wife, though always in the open, offering words of reassurance. Each time she nodded, but her eyes betrayed unease, as though she knew her husband's silence carried louder threats than his voice ever had. By the chapter's end, the village had settled into a strange, heavy quiet. Nothing had happened yet. No new pot was broken, no fresh outburst shook the circle. But in every shadow there lingered the sense of a blade waiting to be drawn. The shadow knife had not struck, but its presence alone had changed the air. The elders could feel it, the Alpha could feel it, and the wife felt it most of all. For when a knife is carried in secret, the whole village walks more carefully, each step measured, each breath held. And sooner or later, a blade meant for silence must find its voice. The night was moonless, the kind that swallowed sound and sight alike. Villagers slept under roofs of thatch and hide, the fires in their hearths long since burned to embers. Only the occasional cry of an owl broke the silence. At the far edge of the village, the husband wrapped himself in an ash cloak, its fibers smeared with soot from the hearth to dull any glint of light. Across his chest lay the shadow knife, pressed tight against his ribs. He moved like a man who had rehearsed each step in his mind 100 times, though his heart still hammered unevenly in his chest. Tonight, he told himself, the Alpha would fall. No more council stones, no more judging eyes. The Alpha's shadow would vanish, and his own pride would be restored. He crept toward the Alpha's lodge, keeping low, his steps measured. The ash cloak brushed against the earth, muting his presence. At the door he paused, listening. Inside, faint breathing, the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. His hand gripped the knife, but just as he pushed aside the flap to enter, a sound pierced the silence. Not loud, not even sharp. A low, deliberate cough. The husband froze. From within, the Alpha's voice spoke, calm and steady, as if he had been awake the entire time. "You carry the cloak of ash, brother. But ash cannot hide the heat of a burning heart." The husband's hand trembled on the knife. His plan, carefully nursed in secret, lay exposed in a single sentence. He pulled the flap open, stepping inside with a snarl, but what he found stopped him cold. The Alpha was not lying down. He sat upright on his mat, staff across his knees, eyes fixed on the intruder with the calm intensity of one who sees storms before they strike. A small oil lamp glowed faintly at his side, casting long shadows across the room. "You knew," the husband spat, his voice hoarse. "I felt," the Alpha replied. "When a man carries darkness in his hand, it leaks into the air. Even children can smell it." The husband lifted the shadow knife, his knuckles white. "You have stolen my place among them. You make me small before my people. Why should I let you breathe while I choke on their whispers?" The Alpha did not flinch. He rose slowly, his staff firm in his hand, his height filling the small lodge. "Because killing me will not return what you lost. It will only bury you deeper." For a long, taut moment, the husband stood trembling, knife raised, cloak wrapped around him like the wings of a crow. His breath rasped, sweat glistened on his brow. He wanted to strike. Every nerve screamed for release, but something in the Alpha's eyes, steady, unshaken, unafraid, halted him. Not pity, not challenge, but recognition. As if the Alpha looked not at an enemy, but at a brother twisted by his own fire, the knife wavered. His arm sagged. With a guttural cry, half rage and half despair, he drove the blade, not into the Alpha, but into the wooden post of the lodge. The knife sank deep, quivering in the lamplight. The Alpha stepped forward, placing a hand gently on the man's wrist. Not to restrain, not to humiliate, but to still him. "You do not need this cloak," he said, tugging lightly at the ash-streaked fabric, "nor the knife hidden in night. Your strength lies not in shadow, but in the truth you fear." The husband jerked back, wrenching free. His breath came in ragged bursts, his face twisted with shame and fury. Without another word, he ripped the cloak from his shoulders and fled into the darkness, leaving the shadow knife buried in the wood. When morning came, the villagers whispered again. Some had heard his cry, others had seen him storming into the night like a wounded beast. And when they passed by the Alpha's lodge, they saw it, the ash cloak crumpled on the ground, and the shadow knife lodged in the post for all to see. The Alpha left it there deliberately, not as a boast, but as a warning. A truth made visible, the artifact of secrecy had become evidence of his struggle. And once secrecy is torn into the light, the whole village feels its weight. The husband did not return that day. He disappeared into the hills, his shame too heavy to bear. But absence too speaks loudly, and the village understood. This was not the end of his fire, only the first attempt. The Alpha, standing in the circle of morning light, knew as much. The knife had not yet found its voice, but it had come close. And next time silence might not break before steel. The hills were quiet, but not empty. Those who had been cast out of the village for their tempers, their theft, or their disregard for the council still wandered there, half wild, living off scraps of game and roots. Among them were men who had no love for the Alpha or the elders, men who nursed their own grudges like coals in the dark. It was to these outcasts the husband turned. His footsteps carried him deeper into the gullies and ravines, where smoke from small hidden fires coiled into the sky. They welcomed him not as kin, but as one of their own, angry, bitter, a man whose pride had curdled. One, a scarred warrior named Black Coyote, listened with particular interest as the husband told his tale. He spoke of humiliation, of a council that stripped him of dignity, of an Alpha who had taken his strength before the eyes of all. His voice cracked with rage, and the men around the fire nodded, their faces lit by orange flame. Black Coyote drew from a pouch at his side and handed him a raven feather charm. Its edges were frayed, its color deep as midnight. "Take this," he said. "It marks you as one who walks with us now. You have been wronged, and the wrong must be answered. Alone you were weak. With us, your shadow will stretch across the village until they bow or break." The husband took the charm, his fingers trembling as he tied it to the thong of his belt. Something shifted in his chest. Alone he had faltered, knife trembling in his hand. But with these men, he felt strength surging again, though it was the kind that burned cold and bitter. Meanwhile, in the village, the Alpha Apache knew the silence of absence spoke volumes. The cloak and the knife still hung as testimony, visible reminders of what had nearly come to pass. Children whispered about the shadow knife lodged in the wood, while elders frowned, knowing such things never ended quietly. One afternoon, Grey Antler approached the Alpha, his voice low. "He has gone to the hills. That is where pride seeks brothers, not healing. And in the hills dwell those who already despise us." The Alpha nodded, his staff pressed into the earth. "The knife left in my lodge was not an end. It was a beginning. When men taste failure, they hunger for the taste of victory more than before." The wife lingered near the council fire, her face drawn. She had seen her husband's anger deepen, and she feared not only for herself, but for the village that might suffer from his thirst for revenge. She approached the Alpha quietly, voice trembling. "He carries darkness now, not just anger. He will not rest until someone bleeds. The Alpha placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. Then we must prepare not only our bodies, but our hearts. For battles of blood are won by strength, but battles of spirit are won by unity. If we do not stand together, his shadow will divide us. That night, the Alpha spoke to the villagers gathered in the circle. He did not name the husband, but all knew of whom he spoke. A man can carry anger in his chest until it poisons the air. If he finds others who drink the same poison, then their breath becomes a storm. A storm is coming. Do not turn against one another when it breaks. Stand as one, for if we scatter, the storm will tear us apart. The villagers murmured, uneasy. They were not warriors in the way their ancestors had been. Many were farmers, herdsmen, women tending homes and children. Yet the Alpha's words planted resolve in their hearts, even as fear tugged at the edges. Back in the hills, the husband tested his strength among the outcasts. They sparred with him, hardened his arm, fed his fury with their own. The raven feather charm dangled against his side as he moved, a reminder that he was no longer simply a man wronged. He was now part of a darker circle, bound by vengeance. But vengeance is a fire that grows without boundary. One evening, as the men sat by the fire, Black Coyote leaned close. "We will not only strike at the Alpha, we will strike at the village itself. Let them all feel what it means to mock us." The husband hesitated for the briefest moment. His anger was aimed at the Alpha, but the thought of punishing the village, those whispers, those judging eyes, fanned the coals within him. His hesitation died, replaced by a grim nod. The raven feather charm swung gently in the night breeze, its dark plume catching the firelight. To the outcasts it was a promise. To the husband it was a seal of no return. To the village, though they did not yet know it, it was a harbinger. The storm was gathering, and soon its first winds would descend. The night fell heavy and still, a silence that seemed to press against the huts and lodges of the village. But silence has its own voice, and the dogs were the first to hear it. Their growls cut through the air before the crackle of fire followed, snapping like bones breaking. At the edge of the village, the totem pole, the old one carved by grandfathers, its grooves telling the story of ancestors and migrations, stood tall, weathered but proud. It had always been the first thing seen by travelers approaching the settlement, a reminder that the people endured through hardship as one body, one spirit. Now, flames licked at its base. Dry wood caught quickly, the carvings blackening, smoke rising into the night sky. By the time villagers rushed from their homes, the fire had taken hold, and the pole was no longer a beacon of unity, but a torch of defiance. On the ground at its base lay a single feather, black as midnight tied with sinew. The raven feather charm. Whispers spread like fire through the crowd, the outcasts. The husband. Children clung to their mothers, while men gathered with weapons that felt too light for what was coming. The Alpha stood before the burning totem, his expression grim. He did not rush to extinguish the fire. Instead, he lifted his staff, pointing toward the flames. "This is not fire alone. This is a message. They have chosen to declare themselves. From the hills they wish us to tremble. But we will not scatter." The wife stood behind the Alpha, her eyes wide. She knew the feather, knew it was her husband's hand that had guided the torch, even if others lit it. For a moment she faltered, love and fear warring within her, but the look on the Alpha's face steadied her. This was bigger than her pain. Later, as the villagers worked to put out the fire, scouts returned with darker news. Goats had been slaughtered outside the pens, their carcasses left in the dirt. Arrows with black fletching were lodged in the posts of the granary. Not meant to kill, not yet, but meant to frighten. The Alpha gathered the council. "They are testing us," he said. "A first blow is never meant to destroy. It is meant to measure our fear. If we cower, the second blow will be sharper. If we stand, they may yet falter." But among the elders, disagreement rose. One called for sending men to the hills immediately, to drive out the husband and his allies before they grew bolder. Another argued that to strike would only bring blood upon them all. The council fire burned low as voices clashed. The Alpha listened, then struck the earth with his staff. "We will not stumble between fear and haste. We will prepare. Let every man who can bear a bow string it. Let every woman who can weave ropes or carry water do so. Let the children learn to run not in play but in readiness. We must show them that this village is not prey." The wife spoke, her voice hesitant but strong. "If he comes again, will you kill him?" The Alpha met her gaze, his silence heavier than any word. Finally, he said, "If he chooses the path of blood, then blood will answer. But if there is even a crack where light can pass, we will not seal it." Her heart twisted, knowing that the man who once laughed with her beside the river was now being spoken of like a wild animal at the edge of camp. But she also knew the Alpha's words were truth. Some paths close themselves when fire is chosen. In the hills, the husband and the outcasts watched the smoke rising from the charred totem. Black Coyote spat into the dirt, satisfied. "They saw," he said, "and they will wake every day now wondering what shadow waits in the trees." The husband said nothing, his hand resting on the raven feather charm at his belt. The sight of the totem falling into ash had stirred something hollow in him. He told himself it was triumph, yet beneath it throbbed a different ache, one he would not name. Back in the village, as dawn broke, the children gathered at the base of the ruined pole. They touched its blackened surface with small hands, asking why the ancestors' stories had been burned. The Alpha stood among them, his heart heavy. He turned to the people and spoke once more. "The totem is ash, but we are not. Our story does not burn because one pole falls. It burns only if we surrender. And we will not surrender." His voice rang across the morning air, carrying strength, but even he could feel it. The storm was no longer gathering. It had begun. The night was cool, but unease lay over the village like a heavy blanket. After the burning of the totem, every sound in the darkness seemed sharper. The snap of a twig, the shuffle of a horse, the sigh of wind in the leaves. Men slept lightly, with bows across their knees. Mothers hushed their children, who asked why they had to sleep inside rather than under the stars. Then it came, the drum. The deep, hollow boom carried across the night. So sudden it jolted even the watchman. It was not the drum of ceremony, nor the drum of celebration. It was the blood-stained drum, its hide darkened long ago in battle, brought out only when danger drew near. Each strike meant urgency. The enemy was inside the circle of their lives. Torches flared at the far side of the village, shadows leaping across the lodges. Horses whinnied, and goats screamed as arrows hissed into the animal pens. Men leapt to their feet, some still half asleep, fumbling for spears and knives. Women rushed to gather the children, shoving them toward the central lodge. From the dark edges came the raiders, figures with faces painted black, the raven feather tied into their hair. Among them, taller than the rest, was the husband. His bowstring sang as he loosed arrows, his arms strong, his eyes set hard. He did not falter. But it was not slaughter he sought, not yet. The outcasts struck quickly, setting fire to haystacks, loosing animals, shouting curses meant to rattle more than to kill. Chaos was their weapon, confusion their ally. The Alpha emerged from his lodge, his staff in one hand, a bow in the other. His voice boomed above the clamor. "Hold the line! Protect the women! Do not scatter." He moved like a man born for such a moment, loosing arrows with deadly calm. His presence steadied those around him, men rallying to his side. Together, they pushed back against the raiders who darted in and out like wolves, always striking where the defense was thinnest. The wife stood in the central lodge, her hands clenched around a blade she had never wished to hold. Through the smoke and flickering firelight, she saw him, her husband. For an instant, their eyes met across the chaos, hers filled with sorrow, his with something unreadable, rage, guilt, perhaps both. Then he turned, loosing another arrow into the night. The blood-stained drum beat faster, struck by a young boy too small to fight, but old enough to stand guard with sound. Each strike was a warning, a call, a heartbeat that refused to be stilled. It gave rhythm to the defenders' courage. The raiders, finding resistance stronger than expected, began to retreat into the darkness. They had tested the village, proved they could reach its heart. But they had not broken it. Not yet. When the last shadow slipped back into the trees, the Alpha ordered the fires doused. Men and women gathered in the square, smoke curling around their weary faces. No one had been killed, but blood was on the ground, cuts, burns, bruises. And worse, the feeling of violation clung to them like a stain. The Alpha lifted the drum and placed it before the people. This drum is sung in the blood of our ancestors. Tonight it sang for us. We have been struck, but we still stand. Tomorrow we will fortify. Tomorrow we will train. They wish to frighten us, but it is they who should tremble. The wife listened, her chest tight. Her husband had declared war not only on the Alpha, but on his own people. Yet part of her wondered, was there a crack left in him that could still be reached? Or was he now wholly swallowed by the darkness he had chosen? In the hills, the husband spat at the dirt. We struck their heart, he said to Black Coyote. They scramble like ants. Coyote's grin was sharp. Yes, but ants bite, and tonight they showed teeth. The next strike must draw blood, the husband nodded, though a heaviness pressed in his chest. He remembered her eyes, his wife's eyes in the firelight. Not hate, not love. Something deeper. A question he feared he could not answer. Back in the village, the Alpha placed his hand on the charred drumhead. Its sound still echoed in his ears. He knew what lay ahead. The storm had broken fully now, and there was no path left untouched by fire. Dawn came grey and unsettled, the kind of morning when even the birds stayed quiet. Smoke from the night's fires still lingered over the village, its acrid scent mixed with the sharp tang of fear. Yet fear alone would not be enough. The Alpha knew it. He walked through the village, staff in hand, speaking low to each family. His words were not of vengeance, but of resolve. By mid-morning, he called everyone to the clearing. There, men carried spears, some worn, some newly carved, all sharpened by hand, and drove them into the earth, forming a wide circle, the war spear circle. Its creation was old tradition, used in times when survival depended on uniting hunters. Mothers, elders, and children alike. Here, the Alpha declared, raising his hand, we do not wait for wolves to strike again. Here we become the pack that drives them back. The people gathered, uncertain at first. Some clutched children to their skirts, others shifted uneasily, not used to holding weapons. Yet one by one they stepped forward. Even the old men who limped on weak knees brought their bows. Insisting, their eyes were still sharp. The Alpha began with the basics, teaching the young to plant their feet, to hold a spear steady, to move as one rather than scatter like frightened deer. He paired the experienced with the untested, weaving them into units. Where before the people thought only of family and lodge, now they learned to think of circle and shield. The blood-stained drum, still bearing soot from the night raid, was struck again. But this time its rhythm was steady, grounding, a heartbeat to guide their movements. It reminded them courage was a choice repeated with each breath. The wife joined as well. She held a spear awkwardly at first, her arms trembling, yet her eyes never wavered. When another woman teased, saying she should rest, she answered softly, "If he comes, I will stand. No one will carry me again." The Alpha saw her and gave a single nod. Proud of her strength, children too were included, not with weapons, but in learning the signals of danger, the carrying of water, the tending of fires. Every hand found its purpose, for in the days ahead no hand could be idle. As the sun climbed, sweat ran down their backs. Muscles ached, tempers flared. Yet with each hour, the people began to move differently, more deliberate, more bound to one another. The Alpha tested them, driving them to exhaustion, then lifting them with words carved from truth. "We cannot match numbers," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "But we can match spirit. They will come in chaos. We will answer with order. They will seek fear. We will give them unity." By evening, the circle of spears was no longer only wood planted in dirt. It was a symbol. Mothers who had never lifted arms before stood shoulder to shoulder with hunters. Young boys who once feared shadows now ran drills with pride. The drum's beat carried into the hills, letting the outcasts know. The village was not broken. The husband, hidden in those hills, watched with his band. He saw his wife standing tall among them, spear firm in her grasp. His jaw tightened. He told himself it was betrayal, that she had chosen them over him. Yet beneath that anger lay a flicker of shame. He had left her to carry alone, and now she carried with others. Black coyotes spat at the sight. They gather like ants around scraps. Spears will not save them. The husband did not answer. In his heart, he knew those spears meant something more, something he had once believed in himself before pride turned him. But he swallowed the thought, hiding it beneath rage. That night the Alpha placed his hand upon one of the planted spears. "This circle is more than wood and stone," he told the elders by the fire. "It is a promise. When the storm comes, we will meet it together." The wife listened from the edge of the firelight. She touched the haft of her spear, thinking of her husband's eyes in the raid. She did not know if they would meet again in peace, or only in the clash of battle. But she knew she was no longer powerless. The circle stood gleaming under the moon, each spear catching the pale light like a star on earth. And in the hills, the outcasts prepared their next strike, unaware that the village they sought to break had bound itself tighter than ever before. The night was silent before it broke. No drumbeat warned this time. The outcasts came under cover of stars, their faces smeared with ash, their bows strung tight. The husband led them, his raven feather tied high, his eyes burning with the promise of domination. They carried firebrands, their intent no longer mischief but conquest. Yet the village was ready. The circle of spears glinted in the moonlight, each defender standing firm, the blood-stained drum poised but unstruck. When the outcasts surged from the trees, the Alpha's voice cut the night. "Hold steady!" The clash was sudden, violent. Arrows hissed, spears thrust, cries filled the air. The drum began its low thunder, guiding the defenders' rhythm. Unlike the chaos of before, the village moved as one. Women shielded children, men countered flanks, even the old bent their backs to the fight. In the center the wife stood. Her spear trembled, but she held the line. When an outcast rushed her, she braced and struck, knocking him to the dirt. Shock lit her eyes, but so did resolve. No longer the woman bowed beneath buckets, she was part of the circle now. The Alpha strode through the fray, staff in hand, bow slung across his back. Wherever he passed, defenders found courage. His commands cut sharp, his arrows truer still. He was the storm's eye, steady and unyielding. Then came the husband. He broke through with a snarl, blade flashing, scattering men before him. His fury drove him straight toward the Alpha. "You!" he bellowed. "You stole her respect, her strength. Tonight I take it back." The Alpha met him, staff raised. Their first clash rang out like a thunderclap, wood striking steel, sparks flying. Around them, the battle seemed to slow, every eye turning to the two men locked in struggle. The husband fought with wild strength, each blow driven by pride and years of resentment. But the Alpha fought with patience, turning strikes aside, countering with calm precision. Their duel was more than muscle. It was a battle of wills, of the past pressing against the present. The wife saw them. Her heart wrenched. She remembered the man her husband had been before bitterness poisoned him, and the man the Alpha had proven to be. Steady, protective, respectful. She cried out, "Enough!" But her voice was swallowed by the clamor. At last, the husband lunged, his blade poised for a killing stroke. The Alpha caught it with his staff, but the wood cracked. With a final wrench, the spear beside him shattered, jagged edges catching the moonlight. For a breath, silence. Then the Alpha drove the broken shaft forward, not to kill, but to strike the husband's chest with crushing force. The husband staggered, air driven from his lungs, his blade falling to the dust. He collapsed to his knees, defeated. The battle faltered. The outcasts, seeing their leader fallen, wavered. Some fled into the trees. Others dropped their weapons, eyes darting like cornered animals. The village pressed forward, but the Alpha lifted his hand. "No slaughter," he commanded. "This ends now." He stood over the husband, staff in one hand, broken spear in the other. "You sought power by breaking others. But strength is not in burdening, it is in lifting. You have lost not because I am greater, but because you chose shame over honor." The husband's eyes flickered. Rage warred with sorrow. He turned his head toward his wife. For a moment the fire left him, and she saw the man he had been, the boy who had once courted her with laughter, who had carried her over rivers when floods rose. Tears brimmed, then vanished as he bowed his head. The Alpha turned to the people. This night we stood together. The circle held. Our unity is our shield, our honor our spear. Let none forget what was shown here. The broken spear was lifted high, no longer a weapon, but a symbol. It would rest in the council lodge as a reminder. Strength comes not from cruelty, but from standing as one. The wife lowered her spear, her shoulders shaking. She knew wounds would take time to heal. Hers, the husband's, the village's, but she also knew that she was no longer bowed, no longer voiceless. She was part of the circle, and the circle endured. Dawn crept slow and golden, painting the battered village in light. Smoke rose from dying fires, and the people stood weary but alive. The Alpha, though scarred, remained resolute. His eyes lingered on the wife, then on the broken spear in his hand. The storm had passed, but its lesson would echo for generations. That honor is not shouted, but shown, not taken, but shared.